Good evening, everybody. Welcome into the Nittany Lions Sports Report right here on Bob Long Sports with Bob Long and Tyler Gelhaus alongside. The Nittany Lions have fallen to a 2-loss team, Tyler, and there's a lot to break down with this. We'll spend an hour doing it. We'll have the help of Adam Bittner in just a few minutes. He'll be on with us at 8:10 p.m., but truly the season that was 2 weeks ago, as we looked forward to 2 road games against Ohio State and Michigan State. That expectation and the team we see now are 2 completely different things. We'll talk about whether these 2 weeks make this season what you might call a disappointment, where your expectations should have been, where they should be going forward, and we'll address off the bat any chance at the college football playoff. Your answer is
no.
No chance. No chance whatsoever at the college football playoff. Very disappointing, of course, for the Nittany Lions. These 2 games may be their best chances to build resume quality wins. And unfortunately, late touchdowns by both teams, fourth quarter leads given up by Penn State both times, and a pass rush, Tyler, that could not get to the quarterback really in either game, especially in the second half. Again, by way of introduction, my name is Bob Long. His name is Tyler Gelhaus. We've been with you guys all year long, and this is a little bit of a different scenario and a little bit of a different tone than our past few shows. You see Rutgers right behind me. Of course, that coming from James Franklin's tweet this week as he wants to move on to get back to that 1-0 per week mentality. Tyler, he said after the game he thinks that this team got a little bit ahead of itself, is a very young team, and he's correct about that in many respects, that was not ready for the moment and crumbled in 2 of its biggest games.
Well, I don't know really what they're getting ahead of themselves for. I mean, that was the biggest 3-game stretch in recent Penn State football history. I don't know if they're really looking ahead to Rutgers. It's a shame because after that Michigan game, things were looking really good for Penn State. They beat Michigan 42-13, sound defeat at home in front of a whiteout capacity, record-breaking crowd at Beaver Stadium. Then you go on the road against Ohio State and you start off guns blazing. You're up by 18 at one point. You're up by 15 with 10 minutes left. You have a really good chance to win the game. Then you have to rebound from that devastating loss in the Horseshoe, and you go to Michigan State. Great defense over there in East Lansing. Brian Lewerke is a much better quarterback than I thought he was. The receivers made plays, and one thing we haven't mentioned yet, I think that storm delay, even though both teams had to sit through it, I think that definitely changed the game, and especially the field conditions favored Michigan State. I think Penn State has better athletes. It definitely was an equalizer in the perimeter in that game. It was just funny, though. It didn't seem like Michigan State had any trouble catching the ball, throwing the ball. I mean, their receivers made incredible catches. Penn State couldn't capitalize making good catches. DeAndre Tompkins had a drop on the 4th and 3rd. The slant there that would have given him a first down. Michigan State made the plays when it mattered most. Penn State had opportunities. That's not the issue. It wasn't lack of opportunities. It just couldn't capitalize, and again, they had trouble closing the game out.
Interceptions for Trace McSorley has some people across the Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, all of Pennsylvania, possibly calling, and I've heard it twice, Tyler, and I didn't ask that many people, calling for a quarterback change to Tommy Stevens. Initial takeaways from that. Is that the first you've heard of that?
I mean, that's not the first that I've heard of it, but I think it's pretty silly. I mean, let's not forget this game was played in really poor conditions. Yes, he threw 3 turnovers or 3 interceptions. The second one, I believe he was thrown to Juwan Johnson in the second half after the delay. Maybe it was still the second quarter, but it was after the delay, and I don't know, it was something with the pattern. The other one was deflected, which was a bad throw and intercepted, and then the last one he underthrew Blacknall, which if he throws that a little farther, he probably catches it and scores. Three interception games do happen. Probably not, it's not something you want to see. But at the end of the day, he's still having a pretty solid year, throwing for 19 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and he's also thrown for almost 2,500 yards. So, I mean, I think that's a little premature to be calling for a quarterback change, especially for some reason we haven't seen Stevens in these last couple games, which I'd be more concerned about because I think he's a weapon that they've underutilized this year in certain formations, and I think he's a player that can really sneak up on teams and hurt them.
When it comes to Tommy Stevens, I've been saying this all year about Trace McSorley. I think he's been an underappreciated, possibly the most underappreciated player on the team, and that doesn't go for everybody in the Penn State community. But, Tyler, I've seen more on message boards. I've seen more folks, when you get up there on game day, making comments about Trace this, Trace that, when truly, at the end of the day, yes, Saquon Barkley does so much even when he does not touch the ball, so he's still the most valuable player in that he's opened things up for Trace McSorley and the wide receivers. But in many ways, he is as valuable as Saquon Barkley in a year where the offensive line, for all its struggles last year, has arguably been worse in terms of run blocking. And so much has been put on Trace McSorley this year. I think he stepped up and played really, really well. I mean, I'm here to say, how many times have we come into one of these shows and said, there's been a lot of hate on Trace McSorley this week, but truly, I think he played a good game last week.
And
this would be the one game where I don't think he played necessarily well. Still threw for over 300 yards. 8th time he's done that in his career, one behind Christian Hackenberg.
Mm-hmm.
But this would be the Ohio State. He played great.
Right. I mean, and that's the thing. Trace McSorley did not lose any of these games for Penn State. Even going back to last year, people are going to blame the Pitt loss by 3 and the Rose Bowl loss by 3. A lot of people have put that on McSorley because of the costly interceptions late, but people also forget that he helped get them there to those comebacks in the first place. Obviously, the Michigan game last year, the other loss had nothing to do with, and it was just an all-around horrible team effort. But I mean, I understand that Tommy Stevens he's a prototypical look to him for a quarterback. He's probably about 6'3", 6'4", 220, 225. He looks like a quarterback. He's got a strong arm. He's athletic. He can run people over when he needs to. He's fast. McSorley's kind of like your backyard quarterback, and he makes plays and he's a winner. Right now, I mean, that would just be silly in my opinion to change quarterbacks. I do think though that they should get Stevens more involved, but I don't think that calls for a total quarterback change at this point in the season.
Open competition next year in camp, no problem. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Technically, it should be every
year.
But right now, I don't think Trace has done enough to lose his job at all. And so whether Tommy Stevens gets a few snaps, okay, I think at this point of the season that makes sense, and everybody could get on board with that.
Right. I'm actually a little concerned that, toward the beginning of the year and even up until about the midway point at Northwestern, before the bye, we were seeing Stevens get a good amount of reps at other positions, like the halfback position.
A lot of halfback.
So I think that they're in a little. The coaching staff's in a little bit of a predicament here because Stevens is a redshirt sophomore right now, and McSorley's a redshirt junior.
Yep.
That really only leaves 1 year for Stevens to be the starter at quarterback, and a lot of times quarterbacks don't wait around for 1 year. So, I mean, I hope that they're doing enough to get him involved because I want him to be a starter for that last year. I mean, I think he's proven that he can be that guy, but he's going to have to sit another full year behind McSorley, assuming McSorley wins the competition next year. And I just think that they have to get him involved or else he could be looking to transfer. But
why didn't he go last year?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't know. Maybe he likes the school there, but also there is that new rule that if you graduate college, and a lot of these guys are doing it in 3.5, even 3 years because of summer school, the football players, you can go transfer to another D1 school, D1A, without sitting out to get your master's in something else. A lot of people have done that. Like Malik Zaire did it with Notre Dame in Florida.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
hasn't worked out well.
Nothing's really worked out well for Florida, but it's becoming more of a popular thing, and that's what a lot of people are doing because they still get those 2 years as opposed to sitting out a year.
Right. No, it's a great point, without a doubt. And so now it is indeed 8:10, and time to welcome our guest to the program. His name is Adam Bittner. He's been on with us before from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He's the digital sports editor there and follows and covers the Penn State Nittany Lions very closely. Adam, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you. It's a little bit of different circumstances from the time we talked from you last, though.
Glad to break things down a little bit.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. And Adam, let's get right into it. The Michigan State game on the road in East Lansing, and about 7 hours later, after kickoff, we had a victor, and that was not the Nittany Lions. So that is a game, obviously, that has taken the season completely sideways. And there were discussions we had last week after the Ohio State game of, well, if they do this and that and they win out and they get this help, they could find their way to the playoff. We were talking about that on the show. Was there any feeling that you got in seeing what goes on in the Nittany Lions locker room that there were discussions and feelings about that in the locker room?
Not in particular. I'm not reporting on the team on a day in, day out basis, and I think all the public facing comments, they seemed pretty confident going into that game last week. But I think backing it up, it was a different story, as we clearly saw on Saturday.
Adam Bittner on with us here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Adam, we were just talking before you came on the air about Trace McSorley and his standing amongst the court of public opinion in the Nittany Nation. Adam, that have volunteered that they think that Tommy Stevens is the guy that should go next week and presumably for the next. Sure.
I think it is. I think, and listen, I've written, as recently as the Purdue game last season, that I thought there were things about Trace McSorley's game that didn't really add up for Penn State. And to his credit, he got a lot better from there as they won out to win the Big Ten championship last year. And I think we had seen a lot of improvement in him this year. I think most of the problem is the blocking in front of him. Up very small for me in the past couple of weeks. Anytime some guy named Brian Lewerke throws for 400 yards against you, I think that's pretty much where the conversation should for Ohio State 2 weeks ago. You're not going to beat a lot of teams when you get beat as badly at scrimmages. But in the end, Penn State's season, whether they had gotten to the playoff or not, was going to be dictated on how they played at scrimmage. And I think it's hard to make the argument at this point that even if Penn State had won these two games somehow by making a play here and a play there, that they would have been able to contend with some of these teams that have recruited well for the past 5 years and have just monster, offensive and defensive lines. I think you would have seen them get eaten alive by Alabama at scrimmage. I think Clemson's probably in that same boat. So, obviously I think the playoff would have been a step in the right direction. Trace McSorley surely could have played better than he has in these past two games. But I think really if we're talking about Penn State's aspirations to be a national championship contender, they have to get better in the trenches if they're going to get there. And so I think your question was, is it premature to be talking about Tommy Stevens? I think it's premature to be talking about anything else than how can Penn State get better on the offensive and defensive lines over these next 3 weeks before they presumably face an SEC or a high-level opponent in the bowl game. And then I think the question is how can they get better for next season? I don't think it matters as much who the quarterback is. I think we can make certain arguments. And I love Tommy Stevens. I think he's probably a better runner than McSorley is. I think he's stronger. I think he can run guys over where McSorley can really only take what's given to him. And I think when you're running around State is, it's helpful to have two guys who can pick up that extra yard. I don't know if McSorley can. So I think there's a worthy conversation there, but I think really the elemental conversation to where Penn State goes from here begins and ends in the trenches.
Hey, Adam, this is Tyler. I couldn't agree with you more about your comments about if Penn State made it to the playoff. I was saying the same thing at work, that if they had to go up against Alabama, like those Clemson lines, they wouldn't stand a chance, because those games at that level, once you get to that point, are won and lost in the trenches. And right now, Penn State doesn't have a strong O-line or defensive line. And I want to talk a little bit about the pass defense right now, because the last 2 weeks have been pretty pathetic as far as I'm concerned, with how they've gotten the ball thrown all over the yard on them. And I think a lot of it comes from the right now with the injuries, obviously from Torrance Brown from the Georgia State game and Buckholtz against Ohio State. They're really thin on the D line, and I think that's also hurting the secondary. I mean, they really go hand in hand, and they just haven't been able to get a rush. I think that there's a lot of guys on the D-line that have bright futures with Penn State. Sharif Miller, Shaka Toney, Shane Simmons, Etor Gross-Matos, just to name a few, but I don't think that they're necessarily ready for the amount of snaps that they're playing, and I think that's why you're seeing a weak pass rush right now. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I absolutely agree, and I think Ohio State. We talk a lot about how Penn State has recruited very well for the under James Franklin, especially in the last couple of years. I think the Ohio State game showed the difference between a program that's really recruited on an elite level for going on 3 years, versus a program that's been recruiting on an elite level since Urban Meyer showed up in 2012. Ohio State just has a different level of depth and talent that Penn State can't really match yet. And as that game got late, I think you saw that Ohio State was fresh, and they were still coming on every play. Even as their offense was striking quickly and not exactly leaving the defense on the sideline for very long. I still think about that screenshot of McSorley on the last play with 4 Ohio State defensive linemen surrounding him and the whole Penn State offensive line in the middle of the field. It's a depth thing as much as anything else. And we talked last year. The sanctions. We were still having conversations about depth and having enough players in the positions so that you can roll, maybe 7 or 8, 9 guys out there on the defensive line in a given game. But just having those bodies is not the same as having quality bodies in those spots. And I think Penn State is still trying to get to that level.
Right.
And especially when you go on the road, and you have a travel roster and you may lose a guy or two, it's tough to go. Even like Michigan State, where they similarly, they don't have exactly the same talent, but they have been, they're one of those programs that moves people along through a system that's been established for a long time under Mark D'Antonio, and Penn State is not at that point yet.
Right, and I think it's important to note too for our viewers out there that offensive line and defensive line in college football usually have to pay your dues a little bit on the offensive line, and sometimes you don't see the field until your redshirt sophomore, really even redshirt junior season, which is your 3rd or 4th year on campus. And Penn State's offensive line has a lot of guys that are much younger than that right now, inexperienced, and the same goes besides the 2 defensive tackles really for Penn State on the D line. I mean, these guys are still young, and they're really not ready for the amount of snaps that they're playing right now, and I think that's showing a lot.
When does that turn the corner? For both
well,
of you guys?
I think it's got
to help at some point.
You would think it's going to happen in the next, hopefully by next year. I mean, a lot of these guys are going to be a year older. They've gotten a lot of experience, especially the offensive line. That's been the biggest as far as the player standpoint, because they had a lot coming back this year on the offensive line. I mean, granted, McGovern switched positions, but really they had everybody coming back minus Gaia from last year. So I thought the offensive line was going to be a lot better this year. I don't know really what's going on there. Adam, I mean, what do you think about how long it takes to develop offensive linemen? Because I know it's kind of like a long process to get them up to speed and size and strength for D1 football.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think on some level, it's a question of what are your expectations. I think if you're looking realistically at where we were maybe about a year and a half ago, I think if you'd said Penn State was going to be 7-2 with a Big Ten championship in tow, and have run over pretty good teams like Michigan and Iowa, I think people would have taken that. I think part of the problem is that last year put them into a position where people believed that they were on a plane that maybe they weren't yet. So I think it's a slow build, and I think Penn State has built compared to where they were when Christian Hackenberg was running for his life. I don't think that they have built enough to the point that they can consistently beat teams like Ohio State or Michigan State, especially on the road and back-to-back weeks. I think the turning point we've already seen a turning point. I think we still need to take another step. But I guess it all depends upon your frame of reference on what progress looks like. I think we've seen progress. We haven't seen enough progress to put Penn State consistently in that national conversation. And I think, without Barkley back there next year and maybe some other talent guys, maybe that won't manifest itself next year either. I don't know. I didn't know it was going to happen last year. So I can't say for sure that we're not going to see them turn a corner next year. But I do think it takes a little bit more than a year and a half to go from the offensive line being a total liability against just about any Big Ten or power conference team to being a group that can compete at the highest levels of college football.
Do you think that the Penn State fan base had maybe unrealistic expectations going into this season after last year's Big Ten championship? It was a magical run. They needed a lot of things to happen last year. They got hot. Michigan lost twice, which gave them the opportunity to go to the Big Ten championship and then have that come from behind win against Wisconsin. State, I believe, was ranked 6th or 7th in the preseason polls. Not that that means much, but I mean, it just seemed like it was the highest expectations, most excitement going into a season, really since maybe 2008-ish area. So,
sure.
I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Adam? Do you think maybe the expectations were a little too lofty for this group, or do you think the expectations of another Big Ten championship and playoff run, was that
of control about what the floor was for this team? I think they certainly had the capability. I mean, they lost 2 games on the road by 4 points. It's reasonable to believe that they had the ability to run the table this year, at least to the Big Ten championship game. So on one level, I think that there's just scrutiny on why they are 7-2 at this point. At the same time, I think it's kind of easy, and I tweeted this the other day, to compare this team to the 99 team, which also had a lot of prominent names, LeVar Arrington, Courtney Brown, those types of guys. That team was the last Penn State team that was number 2 in the country. And I think in college football, we have a tendency to fixate on the big names and their ability to control games by themselves. Certainly Penn State has McSorley and Barkley. It has Marcus Allen, Mike Gesicki. Those guys are bona fide pros, and any team that has them is going to be pretty good. I don't think that they can paper over every problem that your program has, and I think especially in the long off season in college football, it's easy to gradually forget the problems that were in a lot of games last year, especially in the first half of the season. The offensive line's problems were apparent. The defensive line wasn't always great. I think that those problems were there, and we tend to not think about them after as scintillating as a second half as Penn State had. So I don't want to say that fans had undue expectations. I mean, Penn State was ranked number 2, so it wasn't just the fans, it was the media, it was the coaches. Everyone thought that this team was a national championship contender. And they still may have been if a couple of plays had gone their way. But it's tough for me to say that people had undue expectations, but I also think people may have overestimated where the floor was for this team. What could happen if things didn't go exactly as everyone had planned.
And yet, and you kind of came back to it at the end there, and yet they are sitting here losing 2 games where they led in the fourth quarter, 1 possession games each time, a total of 4 points, Michigan walking off. A thunderstorm that takes a 3+ hour delay. I mean, the way I look at it, Adam, and again, you make your own luck in this world, without a doubt. I don't think this team is as far off as we're saying now, and I don't mean we necessarily, the 3 of us, but general media, fans, etc. I don't think they're as far off as maybe we're talking about, and I do believe that they truly deserve to be where they were ranked at the time they were ranked. It's one of those things. It's a tough portion of the schedule. They ran out of gas at the wrong time. Maybe they're a great 55-minute football team, and that's the thing with the depth. But I mean, for a Penn State fan, Adam, what would you tell them? Because what I would say essentially is that this is a team that can play with just about any team in the country. Yeah, it doesn't look great that Ohio State got whacked this weekend, and we'll see what happens when Sparty goes and plays Ohio State this weekend. But I think it's important to remember to stay very grounded and realize that this has been, and will continue to be a special season no matter how it shakes out.
Well, and I would say this too. I think if you look at Penn State history, it's very hard for Penn State to repeat its success from the year before. Just sit there and look at the numbers on the facade at Beaver Stadium, and there's not a whole lot of, year after year performance like that. Usually you can Penn State's pretty good to be really make a real good run at the national championship every 3 to 4 years. Sometimes it's a little bit longer, sometimes it's a little bit shorter. But Penn State has never been a program that is every year in the national championship conversation. So I think this year they were. For 2 years in a row, they have been in the national championship conversation. If they win their last 3 games, they're not going to probably make the top 4, but they will probably end in the top 10 and end up possibly going to a big bowl game in consecutive years for the first time since 1986. So it is important to keep things in perspective. As long as you're in contention, sometimes you're going to have years like this where you fall a little bit short. You catch Ohio State coming off a bye, and then you have to go to Michigan State the following week and deal with a 3-hour rain delay.
That's
bad beats are going to happen, and I still think Penn State this year is a flawed team. Lots of teams are flawed. I think there's only a couple in the country that you can really say are not. But I think at this point, presuming they're able to win the rest of their games, I think you can say that this was a pretty good season.
Yeah, Adam. Going off of what you said about that, do you? I think that Penn State is actually ahead of schedule post-sanction. I never thought that last year they would have won the Big Ten championship.
I'm not sure who did.
Yeah, and it was a really quick turnaround. I mean, I remember when the sanctions came out, some of the tweets were like, they're going to pretty much be like a PSAC school, like a D2 level. They really did right the ship better than anyone really expected for the most part. So I think that gets people very excited. I think James Franklin has done a very good job recruiting, building a staff. Do you think he's still heading in the right direction? I know we talked about the O-line and the D-line maybe not being ready yet, but do you believe in the way that he's recruiting those positions and ultimately developing those players? Are they going in the right direction where they will have offensive line and defensive line national championship type squads up front?
Well, so coming out of last year, it was hard for me to get a read on what kind of coach James Franklin really is. I think that he's an excellent CEO. I think he gets what the modern college football head coach should be doing, and that's being a spokesman for his team. I also think that he's going to live and die on the guys he picks to coach the X's and O's. And I've read a couple of very minor things that I don't think a lot of people have talked about this year that have made me more confident in his ability to lead this program with or without Joe Moorhead moving forward. One of which was, I believe Sports Illustrated did an oral history of how Joe Moorhead's offense came together while he was at it wasn't Lehigh, it was Fordham when he was at Fordham. Yeah. And toward the end of that piece, it was kind of subtle, and it was definitely not the focus of the piece. It was a long piece, but at the end, there was some talk about how he had cultivated Joe Moorhead for a couple of years before he ended up hiring him here. So that pretty much takes him back almost to when he was still at Vanderbilt. And so that's a long relationship to have with someone before you hire them. I think a lot of times in college football, with the churn, very often coordinators and position coaches get hired kind of as dart throws. Maybe that's a little too brutal to put it, but I think most of the time these guys are not vetted as well as maybe you would think they are. But that was one thing that told me that James Franklin takes his job as a CEO of a college football team seriously, that he had picked out someone years before he ended up hiring him, listened to Joe Moorhead's ideas, and then was willing to put his life on the line with that guy going into 2016. So that was one thing. And I think going into the Michigan game, he made a comment during or after practice. I think it was on one of his Wednesday availabilities. He talked about when you bring in lots of recruits for a big game, it's important to make sure you have enough people to make sure they're being led around and given a good experience. It's little things like that I think make him an excellent coach for this day and age. He's still going to live and die probably on the X's and O's guys that he hires, because it's not clear to me at this point how involved he is on either side of the ball in the X's and O's, and how involved he's been to this point in his Penn State tenure. Maybe he is, a better guy with those things than we know. I just haven't seen any evidence of it. What I do know is that he pays a lot of attention to detail, and I think that is a good sign for Penn State moving forward.
Adam Bittner, some great perspective as always. We really appreciate you hopping on. Maybe a different tone than we expected when we lined this up. And, it'll be an interesting last 3 games and then into the bowl conversation. Maybe we'll have you on in between the end of the regular season and bowl time, and we can discuss whether Saquon's going to play in that bowl game or not.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting conversation for sure.
All right, Adam, from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, thanks as always, my friend. We'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Have a great night, guys.
All right. You as well. That is Adam Bittner, and he is always a great guy to have on the show. I'll get your thoughts in a second. I'm just going to say this. I felt as if during that conversation we kind of kept going down into the rabbit hole, and I want to take one step back. I want to take a step back and just say that at the end of the day, these 2 games, was Penn State outplayed? I don't think it was as egregiously so as the stats would tell you based on total yards, because they did dominate special teams except for a blocked punt. If they punt that ball, maybe it's a different outcome. Against Michigan State, there were times where they were clearly the better team. Turnovers will do you in. Anytime you lose the turnover battle by that much, you're going to have a tough time winning a game. That's the difference between this team being undefeated and not. And whether those few plays exposed their weaknesses a lot more, yeah, they certainly did, but probably more so than they necessarily deserve to be when you look at it on a full season basis. At the end of the day, this is still a top 15 team. Adam said perhaps a top 10. I don't disagree with that.
Talent-wise, at the skill position, I definitely agree. Yeah. But I said, when you get into those games, it comes down to the trenches on both sides of the ball, and that's what they're still building up, and that's the hardest thing to build up in a program.
Yeah.
So
the other question you had was about the O-line when you asked Adam, and said, really since about 2008 to the 2009 season, right after that trip to the Rose Bowl, they graduated a lot of offensive linemen that year, and really since that point, they've yet to have a great offensive line.
Well, they haven't really, until James Franklin got to Penn State, they haven't really recruited offensive line that great.
They haven't had the opportunity to with the sanctions.
For many reasons, but even under Bill O'Brien with the sanctions, I mean, God bless him for what he did to Penn State and helping Penn State there. But there wasn't, he didn't have a lot of scholarships to go out, and 2, not a lot of guys, high-end guys, wanted to come to Penn State at that time. I mean, and he'll admit it that he wasn't the kind of guy that liked recruiting. I mean, he was very pro-oriented. He didn't enjoy recruiting. That's probably one of the reasons he went back to the pros. So, I mean, Franklin has done a good job of getting top-end talent. A lot of it you haven't seen yet.
And
Ryan Bates,
I think that's the point,
Ryan Bates is really the first one that's showing, what because he was the first full recruiting class that Franklin had a full season. So,
so the point you asked Adam is, when do we get to the point where we can have an offensive line that's capable of winning a national championship? And I was waiting to hear this answer from him. It didn't really come out, but here's my answer to that. It might be 2 or 3 of the guys that are on the line right now
when they're seniors.
I mean, Will Fries, listen, he's
he's
freshman,
be
right?
very
but
good.
He could be a pro.
He handled some guys.
Bates is a pro.
Yep, McGovern's a pro.
I mean,
Yes.
you have pros on this offensive line.
And you have pros that aren't even playing yet that you don't even know about yet.
Right. So
Thorpe, C.J. Thorpe, and Michael Manette, bearing any significant injuries down the road, should very well be pros.
Sure, and so that's the point. They haven't sent a lot of offensive linemen to the NFL, and so. This is just my nature, Tyler. You know this about me by now. The folks that listen, if they've heard me over the years, they know this is my nature. It's a process thing, right? And this is not like trust the process, Sixer. It's a process thing, and it takes time. And I truly believe that James Franklin is a great coach for this program. You mentioned Bill O'Brien not recruiting. Paterno at the tail end really wasn't recruiting.
Right. Penn State was kind of recruiting itself.
He was sitting in the box without a headset. I mean. James Franklin, CEO. I mean, listen, I'm a big Franklin guy. I think he does a lot of great things. Do I believe that he is the best X's and O's guy? No. I think Adam hit the point extremely well that he brings in other guys. But listen, a big part of the contract negotiations that he had, the reason that the extension was delayed is that he wanted to get more money in the pool for his assistants. He gets it. He understands. Not that he's not getting paid, because he's getting paid quite handsomely, but he understands what's important, and it's about bringing in the best assistants. Listen, I could not be more bullish on the future of this Penn State football program, and I just didn't want it to come off any other way.
So I did pose a question about Penn State fans on our Facebook Live page. If you're out there watching, open discussion. I posted PSU fans. Would you consider this to be a successful season at an unsuccessful season at this point?
Okay.
And Chris Mugler, not sure if you know him, he said that based on the fact, he said it is a successful season.
So it is a
successful season. And I said, why? And he said, based on the fact that we were freaking unranked mid last season. So again, expectations. Yep. I mean, they're ahead of schedule, like we've said. Also, he threw in a process joke there with the Sixers as well.
There you go.
He said, and the fact that Penn State's process of getting back into form was much faster than the Sixers, which is probably also true, Chris. Penn State is definitely Sixers are turning the curve, it appears, but we're going to stick to football here in Penn State football. But they are way ahead of where I thought they'd be. Yes, it's heartbreaking losses. I hate seeing Penn State lose. I want to win every game. But at the same time, look at where they were a couple years ago, even mid-season last year.
Sure.
To where they are now. I'm more upset than anybody when they lose these games, and I'm pissed and whatever. But then once you have some time to really look into reality.
Quick thought there. Quick, simple sports economics lesson when it comes to pros versus college. It's a question of competitive balance, right? In college sports, opportunity cost, when you learned, right? It's the value of, or it's the cost that you give up by doing one thing. So in the NFL or in any professional league, right, the opportunity cost is normally the cost you have to acquire somebody against the quote-unquote salary cap. So you can only pay so much money over the span of your roster. The other thing is the draft. So your competitive balance, your position is based upon how well you play the year prior. So the Sixers, their process was whether they were actively tanking or not. They had poor seasons, ended up near the bottom of the league, could get good draft picks. But really, only 1, 2, maybe 3 draft picks in certain years until they were stockpiling second-round picks, right? That's the difference. In college sports, your first player costs exactly the same as your 55th or 85th scholarship. And so at the end of the day, it doesn't cost Alabama's top player anymore for that university to bring that kid in than it does for the Cincinnati Bearcats to bring on their 85th scholarship player. So there's no opportunity cost in terms of a salary cap. There's no opportunity cost in terms of your ability to pick in a draft. So when it comes to Penn State turning it around more quickly than the 76ers, I know it was just a joke from Chris Mugler, but a simple economics lesson from college to pro. The competitive balance is completely different. The rules are different. Hence, the opportunity cost is different. And you can take a program like Penn State. They could get the top 25 recruits in the country next year. No problem. That could never happen in a professional league. So just a quick economics point.
I have a question for you, actually. We were talking about the X's and O's, coordinators, coaches, position coaches. I think Joe Moorhead has done great things, as same with Brent Pry. What do you think, though, really right now about those two coaches, X's and O's wise? Is this a product of what we see on the field, or because especially with the offense, they haven't looked the same in a while. Lack of touches for Barkley. I get the teams are keying in on him. It just doesn't seem like the same offense that we were used to late last season, even early this season.
So let's talk this season. Let me ask you the question. What were the strong defenses that this offense looked phenomenal against that you saw a marked drop-off in either Ohio State game or the Michigan State game? First of all, I think Ohio State was one of their better offensive games all year.
I mean, granted, they had good field position. They made defensive plays, but they still moved the ball on Ohio State. And like total yards doesn't show that, but total yards also doesn't factor in a kick return. I mean, that's
right.
So I mean, they were able to move the ball quite well against Ohio State.
They took shots over the top. They were able to hit the big ball.
They did.
Ohio State was playing a lot of press coverage, right? So they challenged Penn State. And Trace McSorley really, for one of the first times all season, took the shots down the field and was very successful. Michigan State, again, Trace throws for over 300 yards. It's one of his better passing games on the year. The issue was his completion percentage, just a shade over 55, his lowest all year. So, again, I think that was his worst game of the season, but, how different? The Michigan State game was bad.
Right.
But really, I mean,
I'm frustrated with some of the things. The main thing that jumps out to me is the Barkley touches.
Okay.
I'm not. I think he maybe had 16 carries against Michigan State. What really irked me was the fact that, all right, we get that the offensive line isn't great, and they're not getting a great push. And it seems like this run-pass option, the RPO they call it, it's very slow developing many times, and he's standing still a lot or pretty much not really moving much when he gets the ball. However, his two biggest runs of the day against Michigan State were pitches to the outside, where he was free, and the wide receivers do a phenomenal job blocking downfield, by the way. But they did that twice. He had two successful runs, and then they never went back to it. Again, I'm not an offensive coordinator at any level, so I don't know really what the defenses are running, but I don't get why they didn't go back to that. It seemed like it was working. Anytime you can get him the ball in space is a good thing. They did target him a little bit in the passing game. He had a couple catches. Nobody was really making great catches with the weather, but I just think that you still got to feed him and get him the ball on the perimeter, and I think that's where he's best in this offense.
I think that's totally fair. And Saquon Barkley, a once-in-a-generation talent, truly, Tyler, and a guy that on this team has revolutionized things. I mean, over the last 3 years, he's been really the best back that I have seen at Penn State. And have they utilized him properly? Maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, they've gotten him the ball a lot, but I think, again, against Michigan State, you're absolutely right, and it's Moorhead taking what the defense was giving him. Could they have given him the ball? I think they could have. At the end of the day, I still think the offense did enough to win that game. A couple unfortunate turnovers. They're still scoring 38 points if they're not turning the ball over on a few unfortunate throws, some of which were, a couple were not necessarily McSorley's fault, and of course those conditions. Now, the championship teams, they come out and win that game. There are no excuses, and I don't think there's many players in that locker room that are going to make that as an excuse. But truly, at the end of the day, Tyler, I think there are 2 plays away from being up around 40 points, and it's not entirely a stretch to see Penn State winning that game by 10 points. Things just didn't go their way. So I think the offense thing is a little bit understated, but I understand what you're saying as well.
Yeah, and unfortunately, is probably. It's funny. We talked about.
Michigan State's good too. They can beat Ohio State this weekend.
And that's what some people were saying, that they're not a bad team. But I said they're not a bad team. No, but they're not really. In my opinion, they probably have better lines than Penn State, which is what that game came down to, and they made plays.
Yep.
I think I underrated, not that I'm a coach and I have any input on the game, but I underrated their quarterback. I wonder if Penn State underrated their quarterback. He made throws. The receivers made plays. They contained L.J. Scott, but the receivers made plays. And to me, I'm frustrated right now because it's 2 games, and I think I speak for a lot of the Penn State fans. It's 2 games, both on the road against ranked teams. We knew were going to be tough games. We knew this was going to be a tough 3-game stretch. but there were two games that Penn State very easily, not easily, but they could have won both games. Both games came down to the wire. It's frustrating, especially when we were talking last week about the playoff, and maybe we'll start talking about that a little bit more, the playoff rankings. We said we needed some things to start to happen, all right?
Yep.
We mentioned a lot of scenarios out there, but not one of our scenarios was Iowa beating Ohio State.
No.
And that would have helped tremendously a lot for Penn State if Penn State was able to take care of business at Michigan State. Now you're looking at pretty much almost a reverse of last year. If Ohio State still would have won out, they would have gone to the Big Ten championship. They would have had 2 losses.
Non-conference.
But
Pitt, Oklahoma.
right, but I know, but I'm saying but with the way Ohio State lost to Iowa, that doesn't look good on a resume at all.
Fair.
So that's my point, that if Penn State could have won out, even if they didn't get to the Big Ten championship and won that, and Ohio State did, it would have been a 2-loss Ohio State team, maybe against a 1-loss Penn State team. But at this point, I'm not so sure enough is going to happen, would it even happen for Penn State to jump in there.
No
After
chance.
seeing the games last week, I thought NC State had a good chance to beat Clemson. They did not. I thought Oklahoma
The
State.
illegal shift. Oh, my goodness.
I thought Oklahoma State was going to beat Oklahoma. They did not. So right now, and Notre Dame keeps winning. So
Yeah.
Notre Dame, Clemson, Oklahoma, and then you have Alabama and you have Georgia. They're looking like top 5 teams, and then you can't forget about Wisconsin right now, or Miami for that point. So
Yeah, we just
I mean,
pulled
Miami
them
and
up
Notre
there.
Dame play on Saturday, so that's essentially an eliminator right there. But I mean, it would have been tough sledding, I think, regardless, because I don't think there's going to be as many. Now, like last week, I thought it was going to get pretty chaotic, but right now I'm starting to think maybe not so much after that Ohio State game. That may have been the craziest thing we'll see all season.
I think that it can still get crazy here. You know, hear me out. We look at the rankings right here on your screen. Oklahoma up to 8-1, but remember that number 5 Oklahoma team is going to play number 8 TCU this coming weekend. And I remember our discussion last week, and I was saying how much of a disruptor Iowa State is. Well, they just went out and laid an egg against West Virginia, a game they needed to win. So now Oklahoma State was part of that 4-way tie in the Big 12 with just 1 loss, as was Iowa State. So now TCU and Oklahoma, the lone teams with 1 loss apiece in conference, and they'll play each other this weekend. So likely the loser of that game still has a really good shot, because both of those teams will have beaten Oklahoma State, will have a very good shot at being the second team out of the Big 12 in a tiebreaker. And remember that TCU, if they were to lose to Oklahoma, obviously I mentioned beating Oklahoma State. So no matter what happens, the loser of that game is more likely than not to face the winner of that game in an eventual Big 12 championship game. The conference intentionally scheduled light in the last 2 weeks of the regular season, so none of the big dogs will play each other. You could see one team winning one this next coming weekend, and then the other team winning in the Big 12 championship.
So you're
game.
saying, okay, so the championship could very well be Oklahoma TCU.
That is my belief.
So if Oklahoma, do you think they're going to win this week? They play this week, right?
Oklahoma and TCU.
I think they do play this week.
I think TCU wins the game.
In Norman.
I think TCU wins the football game.
So then the Big 12 is just going to be completely chaotic at that point.
And then the Big 12, like I said from the beginning, will get screwed by that championship game.
I think it's Oklahoma's to lose. I mean, if they win the rest of their games, they're in. And I think that I really think they're going to win. They just look like they're on another level offensively right now with Baker Mayfield, the new front runner, in my opinion, for the Heisman Trophy. But we also have some questions, Bob, for the SEC.
Let's hear it.
Tate Sisk asks, will the SEC get 2 teams into the college football playoff?
You know, it's looking more and more likely, isn't it? Let's take a look at the Alabama Crimson Tide schedule right now. They're going to play Mississippi State this weekend.
On the road.
Yep.
Who squeaked past UMass.
Yeah, Adam Brenneman and the UMass
Yes.
Minutemen. How about that? And then on the other side, the Georgia schedule, they play at Auburn, the 3:30 p.m. game on CBS. Now, take a look at these 2 schedules again. Auburn's
a common denominator. And
Auburn is the 2-loss team right now that if the you know what hit the fan would absolutely deserve a bid. Right now, if they were to beat Georgia and beat Alabama, with only Louisiana Monroe in between, they would find their way to the SEC championship game. They would play Georgia again. And if this Auburn team
have 2 losses
beats
too,
Georgia,
right?
they have 2 losses.
I think that's probably the only opportunity for a 2-loss team to get in.
100%.
Because they would beat the number 1 team, they would beat the number 2 team.
They lost to Clemson.
They lost to Clemson on the road early,
and they blew a 20-point lead to LSU.
They totally blew that game against LSU. And I mean, Auburn's a talented team. So that Auburn right now is playing really with house money. They have nothing to lose in those games, and they can essentially win it all by winning those 2 games.
And look at these games.
And then they would have to play Georgia again, though, that's where it gets interesting. They could end up beating Georgia once at home this week.
Yep. Georgia twice.
At home against Alabama the last game of the year in the Iron Bowl, and then Georgia again.
So here's the fun part.
They'd have to be in.
Here's the most fun part of that conversation. Does Bama still get in over Georgia in that theoretical situation? Georgia will have 2 losses. Alabama 1. Both teams lost to Auburn. Georgia lost a second time. Why? Because they'd be in a different division. Is that fair?
I don't think it really matters to the committee what's fair. I think they're going to go with the best teams.
Okay, who's the best team?
Well, at that point, so out of those 3, you're saying?
Yeah. I mean,
so,
Auburn. If you were looking for
it would
like
be
Tate
it would either be Georgia.
team.
It would either be Georgia or Alabama. Then you're saying if the SEC, if that happened, if Auburn wins out, wins the SEC championship against Georgia, who would then have 2 losses, both coming to Auburn, and then Alabama has 1 loss coming to Auburn, but they don't play for
because they don't
get
the 13th data point.
It would be Alabama because
it would, but I don't like it.
I don't like it either, but it would, even though because they're sitting at home, not playing, whereas Georgia's going out there and battling for the SEC championship against Auburn.
Yep.
Again, all hypothetical, and but then what happens then if Georgia then beats Auburn in the SEC championship?
Auburn has 3 losses, Alabama has 1, and Georgia has 1.
So then is it Alabama and Georgia that then go? So Alabama,
I think Georgia at that point would be the number 1 team out of the SEC, no question about it.
Okay. All right, because I don't.
Because Alabama and Georgia wouldn't have the opportunity to play each other. Their common opponent from a strong team caliber is Auburn. Both teams would have lost to Auburn once. Georgia would have beaten Auburn once. You'd have to go Georgia over Alabama at that point. But again, the only way this makes sense, since Auburn just blew that game to LSU, is if Auburn wins both of these games.
Right.
If Auburn only wins 1, assuming they go undefeated the rest of the way, even if Auburn were to beat Alabama and lose to Georgia, it would simply be the 2 losses in conference for Auburn and the 1 for Alabama. So Auburn needs to essentially beat top 2 teams 3 times the rest of the way. If they do that and their other losses to a playoff team in Clemson, how do you leave them out? It would be the strongest 2-team resume in the brief history of the college football playoff.
It really would be. And the problem, and Clemson continuing to win outside of that loss to Syracuse helps Auburn. I think at this point, I'm not so sure the rankings. I think it'll be, again, this week, I'm going Georgia, Alabama, and then this is where it gets tough. I think they're the bona fide 1 and 2, but this is where it gets tough because Oklahoma's looking impressive. I mean, that's an impressive win on the road in a rivalry game. Notre Dame, again, looked good against Wake Forest. Clemson went on the road and won a tough game at NC State. But right now, if you could pull up Clemson's schedule for me, Bob.
Absolutely.
This is the team that really, outside of any other team in the country, I think they are the guaranteed team. Maybe with Alabama, but they have a tough schedule still coming up. I think Clemson has the easiest path.
You mean a team with the easy? Okay.
They have the easiest path. They were already ranked number 4 in the original playoff ranking. I think that they have. They're pretty much. They should be
what
going.
About this
they
team?
have to take.
What about this team right here?
Ooh, I mean, this Saturday that's going to be a fun game to watch. Catholics versus convicts. Very interesting.
Who's who?
Who's who?
Do you know?
Yeah, I do know. But Notre Dame, if they win out, you have to believe that they're in as well. Okay, I really think that they're in. But I don't think that they're. I think they have one of the more difficult paths to get in. I mean, Miami. That's a
without
team,
the 13th data point.
without the 13th data point. And Miami's a team that everyone's still kind of sleeping on. And they went out. They're gonna have to play Clemson in the ACC championship.
Yep.
Which, if they're undefeated and Clemson's still with one loss, that's a play-in game essentially to get into the college football
I agree.
playoff.
Losers out.
So
because Miami, they won't have an opportunity to prove themselves truly at that highest level. Besides that game against Virginia Tech and the one this weekend that you see now on your screen against Notre Dame, they really have nothing else whatsoever. And I'm going to have you take a look, starting with the game on Saturday, October 7th at Florida State. One possession game. Georgia Tech, one possession game. Syracuse, one possession game. Oh, so close. But yes, a one possession game. North Carolina, one possession game. North Carolina's atrocious. Not only do they suck, but they're on their third quarterback that can barely throw the football, and they put up 19 points on this Miami team that couldn't win by more than 5.
Yeah, I'm really not sold on Miami either, but it's just that team that everyone keeps. Miami and Wisconsin, the two undefeated teams that everyone keeps bypassing, and they have every reason to because of their schedules.
But if they win out, they're in. Both of them. If
they both win out, they're both in. I don't think either one's going to win out.
I guess there is a way that they wouldn't get in. Let's take a look at that top 16 one more time. I stopped at Penn State because even after Penn State, there's really no discussion. I don't think there's a discussion.
So what would happen if it's Alabama? Okay, so Alabama has...
So Clemson would be replaced by Miami, correct?
They would have to be, but I don't think that's going to happen. But hypothetically...
Let's just say Wisconsin and Miami win out, and then let the rest of the dice roll as they were, right? The Big Ten, Wisconsin doesn't have to worry about anything else. The Big Ten's already out except for the Badgers. So Clemson drops a game to Miami. They fall out. Alabama and Georgia play. One of them loses. Back to Tate's question. Do they get two teams? Would a undefeated Wisconsin and an undefeated Miami possibly jump Georgia? Because Notre Dame looks to me like they're in. But if Georgia were to lose and you have two undefeated teams, Miami and Wisconsin, and at the end of the day the committee says undefeated, win your conference, you're in. Alabama undefeated winning the conference, Miami undefeated winning the conference, again, theoretically, and Wisconsin undefeated winning the conference. It could go that way. Then you have one-loss Georgia against one-loss Notre Dame, Georgia having beaten Notre Dame early in the season, a 1-point win in South Bend. I don't know if that's exactly how it would go, whether it would be Georgia and Notre Dame fighting for that fourth spot.
Well, then Georgia should get it then.
Actually, you know what? I'm sorry.
They beat Notre Dame.
Hold on. Stop it right there. I forgot about this. November 11th, Notre Dame at Miami. So Notre Dame wouldn't matter, actually. That's exactly right. I forgot about that.
And Notre Dame
Notre Dame would be out. If we're assuming Miami wins out, Notre Dame would be out.
And if they both do win out, Wisconsin and Miami, I mean, really, if you go undefeated and win your conference championship, I don't care really. As long as you're a Power 5, you're battle-tested. You've gone on the road and won games by slimmest of margins like Miami. It doesn't really matter because they can't control what conference they're in. They can't even really control their schedule. The only part of their schedule they can control is their out-of-conference, which is scheduled years in advance.
Right.
And we all know how tricky that is to schedule games years in advance. And you really not all the time get the top-of-the-line opponents. And sometimes, like when Wisconsin scheduled BYU is a good program. They weren't this year. That's not Wisconsin. I don't think Wisconsin should be at fault for that. But then again, they play in the Big Ten West. Their toughest game of the year is probably against Michigan at home. And Michigan's having a down year for Michigan standards. So I don't think it would be fair to leave out an undefeated Big Ten champ Wisconsin team or an undefeated ACC undefeated Miami champ, but I don't think either one's going to happen, so I don't think we have to worry about it.
I'm seeing some good comments come in, and you probably see them a lot bigger than I can. Anything good you got in there?
Actually, we do have something on the Penn State end from Tom Trainer. He wants to know, PSU wins out, do they still make a New Year's Six bowl? Do we even know which the New Year's Six bowls are? Definitely, it's Cotton, Orange.
Mm-hmm. Fiesta.
Peach.
Peach is part of the playoff.
And then is it the two?
Rose and Sugar.
Sugar. Okay. So it's really 2 of the New Year's 6 are playoff games.
Playoff.
Okay, so there's then 4 openings for each.
So, gosh, that's tough. Because if Penn State wins out, what happens? But what happens in the Big Ten championship game, right? Because Ohio State could beat Michigan State at this point, and Ohio State could win the conference. Wisconsin's ahead of Penn State. Michigan State, I don't think, would be ahead of Penn State anymore. Penn State would be 3rd out of the Big Ten in terms of getting selected. So possibly a Sugar Bowl appearance, something like. Or
Cotton
I
Bowl.
forget which of the
No,
two.
the playoff is Sugar and Rose.
Okay,
so it leaves you with Fiesta, Orange, Peach, and
Orange,
Cotton.
something like that.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely doable, and I mean that's nothing to be ashamed of.
No.
I mean, granted the expectations were high this year, but back to back. I guess now we call them New Year's 6. That is the new term for the playoff committee. It used to be the BCS Bowls. Now it's the New Year's 6. I mean, it'd be a great accomplishment, and then just another thing to build off of, play another top-end team. And, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Do you have any predictions for any games outside of Penn State Rutgers this week, playoff implication games?
Sure. Notre Dame, 2 touchdowns.
You got Notre Dame winning by 2 touchdowns?
Yep.
I think Notre Dame will win. I think probably by 10 points, and I'm gonna go Auburn over Georgia.
Wow.
At Auburn.
Jake
just
from
saying.
State Farm is not gonna like that. Tate Sisk actually asked the question, and we kind of addressed it. What if Miami blows out Notre Dame? Well, then Miami's right in the thick of it.
Yeah, and Notre Dame's not.
Yep. And his question might be, what if Miami beats Notre Dame and then Clemson beats Miami in a close game? And I think that becomes an interesting discussion, but I still think that you're not going to get 2 teams from the ACC, not this year.
No, if there's 2 teams from any conference, it's going to be the SEC. I think
would
that's
agree.
the only chance. And we're still not talking about the Pac-12, which really their only team that would be able to represent would be
TCU,
Washington.
Oh, Pac-12.
Pac-12.
Sorry.
Yep. Pac-12 would be Washington. We're really not talking about them yet, unless
they're in it though.
They are, and they're going to need some losses to happen, and I wouldn't count them out at all. I really wouldn't. They're kind of just floating around. Nobody really talks about them.
I mean, think of it this way, right? If I look at this schedule here, Notre Dame and Miami play each other. Let's just say one of those teams falls behind Washington. TCU and Oklahoma, one of those teams is going to fall behind Washington. Let's say that Wisconsin loses in the Big Ten championship. That team then falls behind Washington.
And the
All
team
of a sudden,
the team that beats Wisconsin's not going to jump ahead of Washington.
No, exactly.
So, yeah.
So you're already up 3. You're at 6. Georgia gets blown out against Alabama. Washington could, in theory, jump them. So they're close. I mean, Oklahoma beats TCU. TCU beats Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. Everything else I mentioned just happened. Washington could be the 4th team. Let's take a quick look at the Huskies schedule.
Not to mention Notre Dame's supposed to go to Stanford, too, so if they don't lose to Miami, they could always lose to Stanford.
That's correct.
Or even Navy, who gives them fits almost every year.
Yeah, did you see that game in Philadelphia, though? That was brutal. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. Temple
just came out and laid an egg. Navy laid an egg.
Wow, Washington still has a pretty difficult schedule coming up.
Stanford, Utah, Washington State, all 3 of those games quality opponents. All of a sudden, they build that resume. They go to the Pac-12 South champion and play against who will certainly be USC after Southern Cal's victory against Arizona. That's 4 straight quality opponents to end the season. Washington is in this thing. They're in it.
They are in it, and nobody's talking about them, and that might be the way they like it out there in the Pacific Northwest. Although I know Chris Peterson wants more early games so the people on the East Coast can watch what they're made of. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if they somehow squeeze in there at the end like they did last year at the 4 spot. Plenty of football to still be played though. Penn State Rutgers on Saturday, high noon, Big Ten Network. We didn't really talk about that game too much. There's not really much to talk about. Well, I guess there is. But
if there's an issue in that game, then there's an issue.
Right. I mean, Penn State's, I think, 31-point favorites or something. You think they cover? You think they cover?
Yeah, I do, actually.
Okay. I think they do too. So I don't have a score prediction. I do think they win by more than 31 though.
put it this way, that feels like a high line, and the folks out in Vegas they've got to be thinking
Vegas
something.
knows.
Vegas knows. So that would leave me very inclined to give the over. Now I've seen a lot of great comments here, so I don't know if you got anything in particular that you got for me. Give it to which one?
Last line there.
Mara Jones, thanks for checking in. Not feeling the love from Tyler tonight. He seems a little too keen on Notre Dame losing this weekend.
I did say Miami
yourself.
was good. I said Notre Dame was going to lose by 10 or win by 10. I did.
Okay.
When you said 2 touches, I said they're going to win by 10. I don't know if they're going to win out, though, just because Navy's giving them fits, although I don't think they'd lose to Navy. At Stanford is difficult last game of the season. It is.
Yep.
It's always a great game with those two teams.
Mm-hmm.
Stanford, completely different team with Bryce Love. And without Bryce Love, we saw against Oregon State when he did not play, they only beat them by 1. But their chances right now are probably getting into the playoff are right behind, in my opinion, probably Clemson and Alabama. I'd put Notre Dame as the third best chance to get to the college football playoff.
Mm-hmm. Yep. One more thought from Tom Trainer to finish us out here. Sorry that I've been looking down here, but this is some great stuff. We really appreciate everybody tuning in here and helping us out on Facebook Live and making the show just a lot better. The show's a lot better when we have stuff like this, so we appreciate it. The Nittany Lions have been playing with banged up and relatively inexperienced Lions on both sides of the ball. The most important yet overlooked aspect of any football team is indeed the lines on both sides. Yet they were just 2 possessions away from sitting 9-0 with a clear shot at a repeat Big Ten championship and college football appearance.
Positive thinking.
Badgers fans are thinking, what? But fair enough, at least in the East Division. That's still a success, in my opinion. I couldn't have said it better, Tom.
Tom's 100% right on that.
I could not have said it better, and frankly, I'm sick and tired of hearing, not you, but and not Adam.
Well,
I'm sick and tired of hearing people overreact. I mean, this is a really good team. It's a really good program, and it's in the right direction. It's in the right hands, and I'm more bullish on this program than I have been in my life. I'm more bullish about the Penn State program than I ever have in my entire life. Is it short? Not so short. Depends on who you're asking. In my 26 years on the earth, I'm more bullish about the program than I have been.
You have every right to be too. It's an exciting time to be a fan. Not everything's going to be easy. Not everything's going to be handed to you. It's definitely more exciting than watching the 7-5, 8-4 days that we were during the sanction era, getting a little used to there. But I mean, positive times ahead. I think. I mean, it's great to be on the national scene again. Obviously, it's tough though. I mean, and there's growing pains with this. And like I said earlier, they're ahead of schedule. It's frustrating when you're ranked number 2 weeks ago, and now you're looking at probably about 15.
Mm-hmm.
That is tough, and especially when it's 2 games that were very winnable on the road against high quality opponents. But you got to have
teams lose.
Yeah,
I mean,
I said at the beginning of the year, I don't think anyone's going to go undefeated, and that still might hold up.
It still might. Teams lose. I mean, they lose all. Ohio State just went and got beaten by 31 points against a team that Penn State
wonderful.
gave up 19 points against.
That was wonderful. I enjoyed that.
Ohio State, you would consider them a top-tier program in it every year?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's especially as long as Urban Meyer's been there, and even before that with Jim Tressel, they were. I mean, they had those couple down years, and they had a little sanction issue too. Mm-hmm. And Luke Fickell, I think, was like the interim coach for a little bit.
They weren't
what they were, but obviously when you have a coach like Urban Meyer that can recruit like that, and that's what I believe Penn State's striving to be. But it takes a while to build it. It really does, and especially with college football, it's not. You have to develop players and in the weight room, and so I mean. Positive days ahead, and this is way ahead of schedule as far as I'm concerned.
Way ahead of schedule.
But a lot of things that need to be rectified at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's fair. Like I mentioned, I think really the biggest point to take away from tonight, Tyler's question was great to Adam Bittner from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette earlier on in the night, and it was about when can Penn State have an offensive and a defensive line ready to compete for a national championship. Adam didn't address this in his answer, but I did after, and I will again very shortly. And newsflash, it's the guys that are there now.
Mm-hmm.
The Will Fries of the world as a freshman. The Ryan Buckholes of the world as a sophomore. Shaka Tony will put on more weight. Right? You even have Sharif Miller with some time. A guy that seems like he's been there.
Redshirt sophomore. He's the lead
feels
dog
like
out
he's
there.
been there forever. He's got so much time left. On the offensive line, Bates is a pro. McGovern is a pro. Will Fries can be a pro. The guys that are young right now can lead this team to a national championship, or at least be in that conversation for the next 2 to 3 years. Heck, they're there right now. And so the last thing I'll leave you with is for those out there on the message boards, and I know they're very conducive for getting into these long-winded arguments and, quite frankly, feeling down about the program. I just think generally that's the way things go on there from time to time. Don't. Just take a step back. Where were they 2 years ago? Where were they on October 1st last year at 1:30 in the afternoon, trailing 13-3 against Minnesota, looking to go 1-3 on the year? And where are they now? They have 2 quality, high-level college starting quarterbacks. They have young, developing lines that are getting more experience at this age than really any other line in the country. They have a number 3 recruiting class coming in next year. They have a great 2019 shaping up already.
Mm-hmm. It'll pay off. All those things will pay off.
They'll be fine.
Rome wasn't built in a day. Isn't that the saying?
That's right. Rome wasn't built in a day. And the Nittany Lions, they find themselves with 2 losses on the year, 3 very winnable games to finish up the season. And if I know the Nittany Lion faithful correctly, they're going to hold them very accountable at a 10-2 record. But I think at the end of the day, that's a great season. They'll be finishing up around the top 10. And I do think they could have a New Year's Six bowl, without a doubt. And I think that it's time to focus on Rutgers. And Tyler, I've really enjoyed the discussion tonight. Sometimes when you lose a game like this and you start to reflect, I think so much comes to the forefront that maybe you can't always pull from within when things are going really well and you're kind of riding the wave. So I think it was a good discussion.
Sure, it's good to talk about our feelings, Bob, especially on air. It definitely helps clear the air there. So
I really enjoyed tonight's show. Adam Bittner was on with us from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And really, guys, I mean, up and down the whole, this was great. The Facebook Live, keep the comments coming in our future shows. We're on every Monday night at 8 o'clock p.m. here on Facebook Live, Periscope, and, of course, on the traditional Ustream app. And then these go up on YouTube later. So check those out. For Tyler Gelhaus, I'm Bob Long saying so long from Philadelphia. And we'll see you next time. We're excited to be with you throughout the rest on the Nittany Lions Sports Report.